Good morning, everybody, again, and welcome to Shed Gospel. I'm doing a second video this morning on, just wanted to do a Commonwealth Catch-Up. I've just dubbed this video Commonwealth Catch-Up number 2, and the reason why I thought it's important to keep doing some of these videos on the questions actually people have on the Commonwealth Constitution and as to its validity. You know, sometimes people throw a lot of doubt and dispersions on the validity of the Commonwealth Constitution, which has an undercutting effect. A lot of people are worried that, look, if the Commonwealth Constitution is our best answer yet, but if it's invalid, then we can't do anything. And it sort of undercuts their confidence, I think. You know, people feel that they don't have any option. But just because we've got a lot of crims out there doesn't negate the fact that our Commonwealth Constitution is still in force, you know. It's still the fundamental law of this country. The reason why you can tell it's a fundamental law of this country is because, you know, the fact that the Commonwealth Parliament very much believe in the Constitution's validity, because if it's not valid, then they would all rescind and give up their seats, and they would cease to be paid, and they would just leave Canberra, you know. But of course, no, they're happy to be paid and happy to keep taking your taxpayer dollars. So therefore, and they would say, well, look, the Commonwealth Constitution created us. And so the same thing's going on with the High Court. The High Court are very happy to keep taking your money, aren't they? Even though they're doing bad interpretations sometimes of the Commonwealth Constitution. So in all cases, it is valid. It is in force, but it's just some heresies that people need to sort of take note of. And I just had a couple of comments on the last video I did this morning, which people can read there. One of the gentlemen who was asking a few things about the Queen's speech in 1957, where she said on video, and I've seen the video, where she said that I do not make laws for you. And they've taken that and said, well, look, well, if the Queen doesn't make laws for us, then what's she good for? And in fact, is everything valid? Well, she doesn't make laws, and that's the whole thing about the separation of powers. She doesn't make laws. The Parliament, the UK Parliament, was created by royal prerogative, which was created by the will of a monarch a very long time ago. And so that Parliament has the job, the UK Parliament has the job of creating laws. And so the Governor doesn't create laws. In Australia, even in our system here, the Governors and the Governor-General do not make laws. See? They don't make the law. They don't write the law. They just assent to the law or withhold their assent. You know, that's the role of them. And the monarch has essentially got the same thing. And so I wouldn't take too seriously the fact that that video said that, she said that I do not make laws for you, as though she takes no role at all. That's not it. And in fact, one video that she's made, even if it was on the BBC, one video she's made does not undo her oaths that she's taken in the oath of accession, or accession, or however you say it, the oath of accession, and the coronation oath. So she's taken those two oaths, which are in law. So therefore she's duty bound by her own oath that she has made to uphold the laws and to make mercy and judgment, you know, mercy in all of her judgments, and uphold the laws of God and do all the things she does, you know. But she's bound by oath rather than bound by a TV appearance, you know. And that's one thing people need to take note of as well, that although sometimes TV can be an indicator of what's going on, or an intent for something, the fact is that she's actually been bound in law to do stuff. And so that's what you have to go on. You can't go on a TV thing. And another question that was raised was, why wasn't the Commonwealth Constitution passed as a law of Australia as our own law? Well, I would say this, that we have actually got the original now anyway, but the reality was, at that time, how do you pass a law that created the Parliament to pass the law on the same day? If you know what I mean. One had to precede the other. One had to be believed to be true to do the other thing. So if the Parliament passed the law of the Commonwealth Constitution on the same day that the Parliament was created by the law, then at some point they've had to believe that that law was true anyway, whether they pass it or not. So the fact is that Commonwealth Constitution came into effect in Australia through the fact that it was proclaimed. It was a proclamation, and it was assented to by, or the people. I mean, it was assented to for sure, but the thing is that that was even the will of the people. The whole thing, you've got to see the Commonwealth Constitution as the will of the people. It's not the will of the UK Parliament, even though they liked what we did. It was not the will of the colonies, although they had to make a pretty strong decisions on whether they want to be part of this or not. But it was the people of the Commonwealth that lived in the colonies that came together to make the Commonwealth Constitution, and the UK Parliament and the monarch at the time, Queen Victoria, had the power to pass it. Right? So it's our will. In all cases, it's our will. But you know, when you have a look at these things, and another common question that people ask, and not to single anybody out, and that's okay, we've all got questions, but one common question people have is, look, what is the effect of the Australia Act on this? And I would say this, that the Australia Act, for one, it's obvious what they're trying to do is create a republic by stealth, which the Australia Act essentially was part of that. But you've also got to have a look, well, all those state parliaments that apparently got together with the Commonwealth Parliament to decide that they wanted to be states featured in the Australia Act, were they the same states as they were as at Federation? No. Because of their constitutions. Their constitutions were replaced. Certainly in New South Wales' case, it was replaced on the 18th of August 1902. So they were not actually a lawful parliament to engage in conversation even on the Australia Act. And if the Australia Act was written under the corporation, so the Commonwealth of Australia Corporation, right, or a parliament that was sitting under that, therefore it has no basis in law anyway with us. So the whole thing is just absolutely riddled with fraud. But what they've tried to do by sort of enacting it at both ends, they said, well, look, if it's not valid in Australia, well, at least it's valid in the UK. But what I would say there is, look, if you can point out a fraud in that law, even if the UK were not aware of what Australia was doing, then let's take the presumption of innocence that the UK were not aware that the states in Australia were not sitting lawfully on their constitutions, and that they were not aware that the Commonwealth of Australia Corporation was effectively putting together this act. If they were not aware of that, and they thought from their end that they were all dealing with an Australia that they'd created, right? If that's what they'd assumed, let's say presumption of innocence there, the fact of the matter is that, look, they've passed it in good faith, but if you're able to point out a fraud with it because of our states not sitting lawfully, that undoes it anyway, right? But what they've even tried to do with this whole thing is actually to get rid of our appeal to the Privy Council as well, because they know that if we went above the High Court of Australia to the Privy Council, which is over there in the UK, we'd actually be able to get some justice for our nation. And what they've tried to do is actually cut off that right of that appeal that you can keep going all the way back up the chain, you know. And you can see what they're doing. It's treason for sure. But here is the thing: does a parliament that is created by the Commonwealth Constitution, by the will of the people, does it have the powers to cut off a fundamental relationship that created them, and that did not involve the people in such a significant impacting change? Like, did they ask the people to cut England off from us? Or did they ask the people, can we pass this thing so that therefore our states are going to not be affected by any laws of England anymore? No, there was no referendum. And so, because none of this existed in referendum, and because our parliament and even the states and all of Australia as you know it is created by the will of the people, right? Therefore, the people have to be consulted in all major things like that. That's not a clear enumeration of powers that they have to just go away and do, Like, for example, we've given them powers under Section 51 of our Commonwealth Constitution to go and do certain things. Like, for example, quarantining, something like that, We don't need to have a second conversation on that subject if we've given them the powers. Unless what they want to do is so life-changing for us that it's going to fundamentally affect our relationship with them, For example. But if it's just like checking the timbers at the dock and making sure that there's no grubs in the timber, or people that are coming in from overseas that have got diseases, they get, quarantined, stuff like that. That's well within the scope of the powers that have been given. But because they were not given the powers to cut us off from England, because we never said, oh, and by the way, we'll give you these powers under Section 51 of our Commonwealth Constitution that at any time, if you want to, you can cut us off from the laws of England. No, because that was not enumerated to them. They have no constitutional basis to engage on those conversations. And so therefore, you can declare it constitutionally invalid, and you don't actually need a court case to do so. There's actually a High Court decision, and it's, I think, from the 40s or 50s. Chief Justice Latham had said, and he's been quoted many times, that if something's unconstitutional, you don't need a court to prove it's unconstitutional, even though it's helpful for you, even though you might feel better about having a court rule that it's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional by the fact that it was, or it's unconstitutional by design if it's just not constitutional, and the court will find it so, but you can find it so. It says that anybody's able to disregard it if it's unconstitutional, He said naturally you'll feel better about it if the court rules so, but it's not invalidated by the ruling of a court necessarily either. It's that it's invalid by its own constitutional invalidity, which happens at the time of the purported assent to the unconstitutional law. See? So on that basis, do we really need to have court cases, 1,001 court cases going back through the High Court that we know has got compromise in there? Do we really need to have them be ruling on all these matters for us? Well, I would say, be very careful what you bring back through the High Court, because they will use precedent not to our advantage. We know what they're doing. We can see what they're doing. We've got enough previous rulings we can pull together from all these old court cases, right? Drag it all together, make ourselves our own little book and show clearly why it's invalid, why we don't have to obey it, why it's got no effect, and all the rest of it because of just the constitutional invalidity, previous rulings, things like that, And here's the thing. The High Court the people have given the High Court the powers of interpretation of our Constitution, right? But did the High Court write the Constitution? No. Did the Federal Parliament write the Constitution? No. Did the state parliaments or the colonial parliaments write the Constitution? No. It was the will of the people. So in all cases, the power resides with the people. You have to remember that the Commonwealth Constitution is people-centric, the people of the Commonwealth-centric. Everything hangs off it as our will. It's supposed to. If it doesn't, we invalidate it, or it's invalid anyway. We just can see that it's invalid. We sort of get a revelation on the fact that it's invalid, but it's invalid anyway if they do something unconstitutional. And that's the thing. And I think the more we wake up, the biggest thing we need to do right now is to wake up to what's going on, and we need to begin to pray. I'm a Christian. Many that watch Shed Gospel are Christians. We do videos on Christianity, Jesus, having faith in God Almighty, because we really believe He's the answer. But when it comes to nations, when it comes to Australia, what our needs are here, the massive need is that we need this thing to come back on its proper foundations without a huge destruction of all of our lives here as such. We need somehow a miracle that goes beyond our comprehension to restore our nation back onto its footing, which I don't even know how this can happen. but we need a miracle somehow to bring it back onto its footing without destroying all that is good, and all, so that all the, you know, the crims actually get back out of jail because they should be in there, or, you know, all these other things that are going to ruin our lives if it all comes undone, you know, to some degree. So we want righteousness to happen, we want the right thing to be done, but we've also got to have some care in how this happens, and the way in which it happens is beyond, I can't even imagine how this is going to be sorted out, but we need to have this miracle happen, and we need to have this. Firstly, Australians got to wake up. Australia's got to take care of its own country. Australians got to want our own country to start with, you know. So, and hopefully dealing with heresies, things that, or just questions. I mean, sometimes I make mistakes too. I mean, we all make mistakes. We've all got some level of misunderstanding about different things, and it's great to have questions, I think, and to explore things out to the nth degree, to do an extrapolation on that thought and see whether it ends somewhere good or whether it's sort of not quite right, you know. But in terms of it, we've also got, and I've perceived there's actually some people out there that are actually trying to divide us, you know. Some people are actually out there, they put like 90% truth with 1% deliberate or 10% deliberate error in there in order to derail good people, in order to make people seem stupid or wrong for questioning things or whatever, you know, and to just try and throw doubts on things. Baseless dispersions, I would call it, you know. And so I don't give that any time. I weigh it up. I ask God about things often, you know, what do you think about that one, Lord? And if I don't feel right about it, I just forget about it, you know. But what you need to remember is the Commonwealth Constitution is in force. It's the will of the people. They can't change it. It's holding all things together. It must be obeyed, though. There's big crimes for those who don't obey it. There's big crimes for those who are trying to overthrow it. There's big crimes that they've all been doing, and just because they've been doing crimes, right, doesn't mean that we need to listen to what they're doing or listen to what they're saying, or even if they're able to somehow claim another basis of authority that we never gave them, because they just can't. So in all cases, you are put supreme. What they hate too, what they hate is, and why they hate this, I think, why they hate our Commonwealth Constitution is primarily because it put the people of the Commonwealth supreme. You know, I've heard all sorts of garbage out there. Some people say, well, look, it doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. Well, you're one of the people of the Commonwealth, and it applies to you. It sets you up on top. So why don't you want it? What's wrong with the Commonwealth Constitution? Even if you didn't write it, but it applies to you, but it's telling them how they've got to obey it, and how they have to do a good job for you, and that they are subordinate under you through a delegated power. Why don't you want that? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that relationship? Why don't people like the Commonwealth Constitution? You know, it's this lack of understanding I think people have as to what it is. People think, well, it's trying to tell me what to do. It's trying to tell me how to live my life. Well, no, it's not. You read the thing. It's telling them what to do. It's telling them that they have limits to their powers. What's wrong with that? If you don't want them to be supreme and sovereign in their own lunchbox and tell you everything to do, and you think that you have to unconditionally submit to everything that they ever say, ever, then you're going to have to actually find out what the Constitution says, and you'll be relieved to find out that Constitution is defining boundaries where they can't cross over. See, the boundaries to try and put them up over us, or put a dictatorship in power, then, you know, that's unconstitutional. A stream cannot, you got to get this in your head too. It's a great little saying to remember. A stream cannot rise above its source. You know, you think, well, if you've got a water tank, but you've got the spout up above the water tank, does water come out that spout? No, it doesn't. Everything that comes out of that tank comes out because it's below the head pressure of the water. The same thing is with laws, right? Those who supposedly have authority cannot rise above those who gave them the authority, right? So if you gave them the authority through the Commonwealth Constitution, and this is a collective thing, which means you have to obey it too, but it is your will, right? But they cannot claim authority or powers above the Constitution that gave them powers. So if they're doing something unconstitutional, at no time, in no way can they have a lawful basis to do what they're doing. Does that mean that they will stop doing what they're doing? Not necessarily, until you rise up and say and do something. But this is why I think this is where our prayers have got to happen, because, you know, a lot of times in nations in the past, this results in bloodshed. You know, standing up against the regime results in a lot of bloodshed. And I believe that this, we don't, you know, obviously freedom comes at a price, but in praying for our nation, this is why I think it's so crucial that it would be better, wouldn't it be better for each one of them to be taking each other apart, right? For them to be exposing each other's own corruption, rather than us burning ourselves out trying to do it. It's them, it's their wickedness that they're trying to do, see? But if the wicked turns on the wicked, that's when you start having a good day, right? So that's what we need to have happen in our nation. And all sorts of cool stuff that God can set up to save our nation. But, you know, hey, believe in God's word, believe in the Bible, it's true. But also believe in the Constitution, because it is true. And it's the highest, most fundamental law in our country that must be obeyed by all. And if they disobey it, they have no powers. And in fact, here's another truth for you, is that any deviation away from the Constitution, any deviation away from truth, right, towards a lie, or away from the Constitution, say they've got no constitutional basis for something that they're trying to do, that's a deviation away from power, from lawful power. If they want the maximum amount of lawful power, they have to come into perfect alignment with the Constitution. See, because there is no other source of power at all. So if they want to have true lawful power, they have to be in perfect constitutional alignment, because that's the only place where power comes from for them. So if they're making something over here that's unconstitutional, or sort of deviating away from it, or trying to cut the lawful basis out from under the Constitution somehow, they're only ever cutting out, like they say, cutting off their nose to spite their face. Right? So if they can't have any lawful basis if they're trying to remove their lawful basis. There is no other source of power. There is no other granting of power. There is none. Even if the Queen, here's another thing too, which just dealing with another heresy, is or thought process that people think that a Queen, just because she signed off on the Victorian Constitution Act, the Victorian Constitution Act 1975, right? They've claimed, because there was a court case in Victoria that actually said, well, because the Queen didn't sign off the Victorian Constitution 1975, therefore it's not lawful. That court case fell over actually in the High Court. I think it went to the High Court. It actually fell over in the High Court because the basis of the argument was that the Queen didn't sign it off. But no, apparently she has signed it off, right? The Victorian Constitution 1975. But does that make it lawful? No. Right? And here's the thing. And why do you know these things that can be unlawful? Because it's unconstitutional. The monarch herself upholds the laws of the land. That's what she's there to do. And if she's put into a position of compromise by her advisors or those who are seeking to have her do something that's unconstitutional, what they have done is put themselves in the firing line for huge crimes being laid against them, for the betrayal of the people, for the putting the monarch herself into a position of betrayal of the people. See? What they have done. Do you understand? What they have done is put themselves in a lot of trouble. It's not validated the law, but they've only just incriminated themselves in their intention of what they were trying to do, was to cut off the social contract between the monarch and us. See? And the more you realise this, the more you just think these rotten crims are going to go down for what they're doing. But the more we realise it, the more we begin to pray, the more we understand these things, the more God's going to help us and do some amazing miracles for us to just begin to take it apart for us, you know. But we have to take a step of faith and just begin to, you know, learn, but to begin to speak out and to begin to remind people of the truth of this is the way it is. So God bless you, friends. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.